So yesterday, Golden Goddess, Dreaming of Reality, and Miss Nasty Jackson did a nearly 2 hour long live stream talking about the mulattoes and levying their criticisms of us. And I actually think this is a useful and constructive conversation that needs to be had. And I would actually like to address some of their talking points and just give my pushback, because this is a conversation that needs to be had out loud. And I think that not having this conversation does more harm than good. So let me just lay out their essential criticisms of us, the mulattoes. Their criticisms effectively boil down to: we are too hostile to monoracial people. Encouraging divestment from the black community is going to backfire. We're too militant. Our approach is too aggressive. And once the monoracials catch wind of what we're doing, it's going to be ugly. And you know what? There might be a lot of truth to that. I would concede. But I have to ask, just bluntly, what is their plan? What is their solution? What is their grand idea in regards to our future? Because here's how I see it. Mulattoes in the United States only have three options. Only three. There's only three paths forward. And I'm going to lay them out very clearly. Option A is the default traditional option, which is you identify as black. You assimilate into their community. You take on their identity. You take on their history. You take on their culture. And you don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to explain your identity. You know, being black in America is immediately understood. There's a sense of simplicity to it. And I think that there's a lot of psychological benefits to this, to just saying you're black. Very simple, very easy, very straightforward. Not confusing whatsoever. But of course, the cons to this are that it reinforces one-drop thinking. We are being essentially prevented, when you take that option, we are being prevented from building a separate mixed race identity or a mixed race category. The opportunity for institution building or a sense of peoplehood or our own culture is totally off the table. Any kind of ethnogenesis is totally off the table. Your inherited identity becomes secondary because you've just chosen to identify as black. So there's pros and cons. There's trade-offs to every single option on the table. But that's option A, just identify as black. Okay, and then there's option B, which is recognize that you're biracial, recognize that you're mixed, but ultimately you don't divest from either community. Whether it's white and black, whether it's black and Hispanic, you're ultimately still committed to maintaining relationships or being a bridge, you could say. And this is what I call the bridge approach, right? Where you say you're biracial, you say you're mixed, you understand your experiences are distinct, you understand your experiences are different, you recognize that they deserve space to be validated, space to exist and be discussed openly. And, you know, I'm sympathetic to this, but ultimately there is a fatal flaw to this approach because it's complacent. And this is the approach that Miss Nasty Jackson, Golden Goddess, and Dreaming of Reality have taken. It's the moderate, safe, politically correct approach, which is, well, we're biracial, we're mixed, we understand we're different from, you know, monoracial black people, but ultimately, like, we still want to participate in their spaces. We still want to participate in their culture. We're not interested in building a separate mulatto or biracial identity, black and white identity. We're not interested in doing that. We don't want our own institutions. We don't want our own culture. We don't really care about having our own distinct identity or sense of peoplehood that we can pass down over multiple generations. This is the safe, complacent approach. And the way I see it is you might as well just identify as black at that point. Like, you might as well just go all the way in, because this kind of moderate, safe, PC approach, it's just like, what is that? Like, you're not ultimately solving the question of who are we as black and white biracial people. You're just saying we're ultimately just a bridge. We have to be politically correct. We have to be safe. We don't need our own culture. We don't need our own history. We don't need our own identity. We don't need a sense of peoplehood. And there's limits to that approach. There's limits to that approach, serious limits to that approach. the playing it safe, the bridge, the cultural connector, which is the path that it seems they've taken. And they think that's the right approach. And I don't, because that approach can only get you so far. It's hard to build a sense of peoplehood around a biracial identity. You need a strict, specific term, and mulatto serves that function, which is why I've taken the maximalist position, which is that mulattoes are a separate race, a separate people. We belong to a separate category. We should internalize a different history, a different identity, a different story, and we need to pass that down over multiple generations. And we have an obligation and a duty to each other, and we should honor our heritage. We should value our heritage, build upon our heritage. That's what I'm advocating for as a mulatto. And that to me is a serious, radical, admittedly, but a serious, absolute maximalist position. But that's the only firm position on which you can actually change this racial status quo, because the biracial kind of mixed identity, the biracial kind of mixed position, it's very safe, it's very PC. You know, you can maintain your kind of connections to both cultures, both people, but you're not ultimately making a declarative statement that you are different and you deserve a greater sense of peoplehood and tribe with people who are similar to you. It's this safe kind of PC, biracial, mixed race, middle ground, and ultimately that's not going to serve us in the long run, and that's not going to help us accomplish a sense of peoplehood in the long run. That approach can only go so far, and the reason why is because you're not ultimately making a strong declaration of a separate identity, which means a separate history, separate destiny, separate goals, separate objectives. You are building your identity on ensuring that you are structuring your identity around Black people's feelings, around what's safe, around what's tolerable, around what's PC. And you can't build anything with that. You just can't. You can't build a sense of peoplehood when you're walking on that kind of tightrope. And people can easily kind of pick apart your identity, and it's just, there's nothing you can do with that. You know, the whole kind of biracial mix thing. I get it, but that to me is the safe kind of middle ground option. It's like, just call yourself Black at that point, you know? For me, it's like, it's either mulatto or Black. I'm not doing the whole biracial mix thing. It's just like, what even is that? I don't like that whole kind of, we're going to be caught between two worlds. I don't. I want a clear, firm stance. And ultimately, the problem I have with people like Golden Goddess and Dreaming of Reality and Miss Nasty Jackson is that they're thinking small. When we say we're mulatto, what we're saying is we're aspiring to something greater. We're aspiring to something greater than being accepted by Black people. We're not going to build our identity around managing Black people's feelings. And that is a kind of divorce. That's a kind of separation. That's a kind of, I don't know, delineation. That is ultimately what is required in order for the building to begin. The building of a unique separate identity to begin. And if you can't draw that line in the sand and maintain that position, then we're not going anywhere. The whole biracial mixed thing, that's not a solution to our problem. You know what I mean? So that's my honest response to them. But I'd like to have the conversation with them. We can hash it out. We can have this debate. We can have this conversation. But ultimately, this is the position that we're in. Those are the three paths you have. You can either say, I'm Black, which means cultural continuity, communal access. You will be exalted as, you know, a hero in the Black community, in some cases for demonstrating commitment and loyalty to the Black community and the Black plight. That's the first option you have, but obviously there's cons to that. You know, you disregard your heritage, your ancestry. You can't build upon it. You can't maintain it and pass it down over multiple generations. So there's trade-offs to assimilating into Blackness. Then there's the whole biracial mix, the bridge approach, where you maintain ties and connections to both communities, but ultimately you're playing it safe, you're being moderate, you're not really committing to the position that you are a different people altogether. And This is a half measure, in my opinion. And maybe there will be some consciousness that grows around being biracial or being mixed, but it doesn't answer the question of who are we as mulattoes. That question never gets asked because they don't want to ask that question because they want to ensure that their kind of ties or connection to their ancestral groups is not lost. And I understand that, but ultimately that doesn't solve the question of who are we as mulattoes. And then there's the position that I have taken, which is the maximalist position, which is we're mulattoes, we're a separate race, separate people, separate history, separate identity. We should build on that. That's what I've advocated for. But obviously the cons to that are a lot of social backlash, a lot of criticism, people feeling betrayed, people feeling hurt, you know, but it gives us the ability to kind of build on who we are. And those are the only three options that we have. But let me know what you guys think, right? Those are the three options that we have moving forward as mulattoes. And I've taken the third option because that's the only way we can truly reclaim our destiny. Nothing else will suffice. It's Mulatto Activist, and I'm out.